Welcome to the Developmental, a podcast about the messy, beautiful ways grown-ups grow up. Here, we explore turning the science into the day-to-day practice of adult development in teams, homes, organizations, and life. Hello, friends, and welcome to a new episode of the Developmental. Today, my guest is the brilliant Nathalie Martinek, PhD. An amazing researcher and practitioner of human development whom I have discovered by following her Substack online and initially being drawn by its very unusual title, Hacking Narcissism. Nathalie helps people build relational leadership capacity and cultivate effective relationships in professional life, while also supporting those who've been scapegoated, sidelined, or harmed in environments that protect image over people. As a coach, she works with professionals to shift unhelpful relational patterns and navigate subtle power dynamics. As a group facilitator, she creates spaces for learning, applied reflection, and restoration. As a consultant, she helps individuals make sense of workplace dysfunction and emerge intact, with insight into the system and how to move forward. Her approach draws on years of practice inside and alongside institutions, informed by an early career in developmental biology and cancer research, where she studied how environments shape behavior and how systems enable dysfunction. Nathalie writes and teaches on scapegoating, narcissistic systems, relational leadership, and the emotional forces that shape them. She is the author of The Little Book of Assertiveness, The Scapegoating Playbook at Work, and the creator of one of my favorite Substacks, Hacking Narcissism. In this conversation, we draw parallels between Nathalie's work and the vertical development research, and we dive into some really interesting topics, including 3 types of shame and how do you walk the talk as a facilitator or a leader. Welcome, Nathalie. It's so lovely to have you here.
Yeah, thank you, Alice. It's finally we're getting
Yes.
together to do this. Been a long time coming.
Yeah, I think it's been a couple of months since we've been dancing around each other's calendars, but we were determined we were going to do this, and we
Yes.
are. So I'm super excited.
Me too.
And also, I'm excited because this conversation is a living example of, or a manifestation of the intention I had when I started my Substack. So I was hoping it would open the door of dialogue with fellow nerds in the developmental space, but fellow writers or fellow facilitators who may be doing slightly different things in this adult education space, but from whom I can learn and with whom I can cross-pollinate. So Substack brought us together.
Substack, LinkedIn. Yeah.
LinkedIn. This is a conversation emerging from the intersection of our two bubbles that actually have quite a lot in common. So I'm super excited.
Yay, let's do it.
Let's do it. What drew me to your writing was when I discovered a Substack called Hacking Narcissism. And that just, I don't know, there was something about it that really grabbed me. Because it spoke to this idea of morality in business and in other environments. And it's something that I feel so strongly about. And I also feel very confused about. Yeah, I was very intrigued. And when we had our first chat, our first catch up, where we got to know each other a little bit, my first question to you was asking, why hacking narcissism? Tell me how you got to this. So I'd love it if you'd want to share a little bit about what's the backstory? What made you interested in this topic and passionate about it?
Yeah, because it's a weird meandering story, as they all are. And it's not one thing happened in my life that opened my eyes and I just went down a path. No, it's quite the opposite of floundering in the dark, trying to work out what the hell am I going to do with my life. And the thing that kept me interested is intrigue about human behavior and what drives us to act out in certain ways. And even though I would think, yeah, I'm a good person, I care about others, I want others to be happy and around me, there's this disconnect between how I perceive myself and how others perceive me, and whether or not people feel safe enough or trusting enough to tell me how, or honest enough to tell me that is an accurate reflection of the impact I'm having. So, how did I get here? I was a scientist before, a biologist and a cancer biologist. And what I was seeing in especially when I was doing my postdoc, was studying the metastasis of cells around an organism and how it corrupts the organism basically and hurts it, harms it. But it does it by taking advantage of the systems of the organism to protect it. So I was seeing similar kinds of dynamics playing out in my work environment in terms of people's behavior and how the sort of what we would call a toxic environment, where there's favoritism, there's neglect, there's some corrupt things going on behind the scenes. Some are more obvious than others, to again survive in an environment that requires a certain skill set and care and traits that make the organization look good, make the institution look good, that gets you funding, that gets you published. So I was seeing all this play out, and I became more intrigued by that, especially the impact that this culture was having on me and the changes that I was undergoing in order to survive in it and becoming not me, and becoming a part of an expression of myself that was also quite toxic. And it wasn't just in the workplace, it spilled out into every other area in my life and contributed to dissatisfaction, moral distress, etc. So that I use my life as my case study, and then I compare it to others who are dealing with their challenges, and by understanding myself and being honest about how I experience things and how I respond to things and whether or not those responses are good and beneficial. That has helped me start to tap into what's going on, what might be going on for others, and then testing it out. So I developed theories and frameworks from that and continue to test it out and learn from those, the application of those ideas and how others implement those ideas and the results they get. And that has helped me refine and come to various conclusions about our motives as humans. So that has just kept me intrigued for years. And in that time, I've studied group facilitation, so understanding group dynamics and why seemingly nice people when they come together, they form hierarchies, and some might bully, some might exclude, because those were my experiences as well, as somebody who had been excluded and bullied, but also someone who participated in taking somebody down. I'm not immune. Nobody's immune to these things. I've just hopefully been honest enough where I can start to understand what is driving these unhelpful but survival behaviors and survival in a context. And that's what I've been writing about and talking about and educating about ever since.
Yeah. I find it so fascinating that you started with researching human biology and pathology, and you ended up practicing in the human behavior space. And there's an additional layer of fascination there for me because I come from a medical family. Both of my parents are doctors. When I was growing up, the mantra in my family was, what you can't see or measure doesn't really exist. So my dad is a surgeon. So this whole, you cut out the tumor and you see the outcome. Everything is so tangible and concrete. And I always had this feeling that the human mind is a very much a tangible and concrete thing. So there's something really interesting about the willingness to learn from that visible, tangible, biological space to then apply some of those lessons to this not so easily seen, but equally real world of human relationships and systems and how they work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even there's something also very vulnerable, and I'm hearing some of that honesty come through from how you're sharing it. When you become the cancer cell and you catch yourself from a social perspective becoming part of a cancerous system. So what does it take to be able to see that play out?
That's a very good question. Yeah, and that's what drove me nuts about studying these biological systems, especially around pathology, because we're not able to study the role of emotions and trauma and our relationships, because to me, everything is relational. We are in relation with things that we can see, but also lots of things that we can't. and that are obviously harder to control and have a control over us. They definitely influence us. So I had to get out and go, there's more going on in the story besides what we try to measure and control in a biological system. So you asked a question and I just totally went off track.
Yeah. No, it's all good. I didn't even remember exactly what the question was.
Oh, I became the cancer.
Yes,
Yes.
is it
Yeah.
for you to recognize? Because I think it's easier to recognize when you are being victimized or when the environment is toxic. And
Yeah.
the reason I'm asking the question is because in all my years of working in organizations in facilitation, I've always been aware of this paradox of the people I meet in a training room, they're all good in the sense that, they all believe that they've got good intent. They show up as wanting to do good. But quite often, the experience I had of a participant that, showed up as super well intended in relationship to me was not the same experience their team had of them.
Mm.
And the same person showed up very differently in relation to their team. And usually people are blind to these
Mm.
dichotomies. They do believe that they're well intended, but they can do a lot of harm
Mm.
while being extremely well intended. So, this willingness to see yourself as the cancerous cell, that is not an easy thing to do. And it's not something that everybody can do. And it's an ability, honestly, for me that I would love to see more of us develop, owning our potential for being toxic in turn.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, I was curious what your lived experience of noticing yourself be toxic and also be a victim of a toxic culture at the same time. What was that like? What helped you gain that awareness?
Yeah, I think I was just going through a period in my life where I was completely dissatisfied with everything. So the career was part of it, but also the pressures of motherhood with two small children and financial pressure, lots of pressures. And I think I've always had a lot of energy and I was playing squash competitively and I slowly started to lose energy in my body and my legs were not coordinated with my arms. And when you're playing an intense sport like squash, well, that can be a bit dangerous. So I started almost tripping over myself. So that was my first sign that even though internally I knew things were not right, that was my sign that something is really off. And then that started, I guess, a period of examination about myself and the realization I had to leave the organization. I had to leave the profession because it wasn't just the workplace, it was this whole way of life was not good for me, which is hard because I didn't train for anything else. So I think for anyone to be able to reflect or examine themselves, their feelings, their experiences, it's easy to blame. And I definitely went to that place, but I also knew that wasn't enough. And I had a conscience, and my conscience was nagging at me because I would watch myself and my behavior with people or the things that I thought, and I didn't like it. So there was this incongruence in me between how I liked to be and how I was, and the influence I saw that I could have in persuading people to see things a certain way. And I was like, this is not how I want to be. So I think you need to have some inbuilt. I don't know if it's humility, but an ability to reflect on your own actions and get really honest and see that the way I'm behaving isn't the way that I want to be. But it's not because I'm flawed. It's because also I'm being heavily influenced by this a relational or ecological context that is just really unhealthy for me.
Yeah.
So it's being real about me as a perpetrator, but also the perpetrator is outside of me as well, that there's an expectation of certain way of being and the way of showing up and expressing yourself to represent it that is not going to be good for some people. And I'm not one of them. So I had to accept that,
Yeah.
which again is a process in itself.
Yeah. So you're talking about being able to hold that balance between truly owning your own behavior and its negative impact on others. And
Mm.
what I'm also hearing is that for you, some of the physical symptoms that came with that level of stress that you were experiencing were also in and of themselves a wake up call, but you were also noticing how you were reacting and you
Yeah.
didn't really like how you
Yeah.
were showing up. And at the same time, holding that with a bit of compassion and acknowledging that there are a lot of pressures in that culture, maybe that you're embedded in.
Yeah.
that are fueling some of your stress, which in turn is fueling some of your behavior. But do that without just blaming the culture and not owning
Yeah.
your own stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the culture blame came first. The people and culture blame, that was there for a while. The having compassion didn't come until years later
Yeah.
because I was still in survival mode and there was a lot of harshness towards myself. That was my go-to place.
So you were
And
upset with yourself for not showing up as you wanted to show up.
yeah, that and that I wasn't able to hack it as a scientist. So there was lots of the criticism that I was firing away at myself. But that was the way that I did things then in order to push me to come to tough decisions versus the compassionate approach that I would choose now. I didn't have that skill then.
Yeah. So what was the process of getting from that place to this much more compassionate, self-aware place? And I know this also came with a complete career change for you.
Mm.
Yeah. How did those two things go hand in hand for you?
Yeah. Yeah. So it was messy. It's a messy process and it's long, but I guess what was also happening concurrently while I was starting to contemplate leaving was a sort of spiritual awakening. So starting to want to venture down into the world of the mysteries and the unknown and the unseen because it wasn't unknown and unseen to me. I felt it very strongly. And so I needed some guidance on how to do that. So I found a place to do that. And in that space, I learned about spiritual healing techniques and things like that and how to work with people. So I've always been good with people intuitively and always seemed to understand what might be going on under the surface that they're not talking about that's driving certain things from happening, especially conflict in relationships. So I've had this natural instinct that I never pursued. And so this gave me finally a place where I can pursue that and learn how to approach situations with compassion. So in learning how to help others, I was also learning how to help myself.
Yeah.
And then I went into at the same time I started learning about group facilitation and then again a lot of the similar techniques were involved but now a bit different because you're trying to help put people at ease and help them to open up and share perspectives and make sense and meaning and bring different perspectives together and deepen that to help people understand why they think the way they do and how that thinking shapes the way they practice. So all of that was like me learning about me while learning to help others. And then the compassion naturally came. But first, compassion comes sometimes as an emotional or spiritual bypass where you make excuses and justify certain behaviors because you can't hold that complexity of I was a perpetrator here but it's understandable given the circumstances. Sometimes we just go, well, that was a divine plan. So we bypass this sort of accountability
Yeah.
where I realized over time that's not a good thing, but that's a process to developing like embodied compassion.
Mm.
So now I'm able to hold multiple perspectives, multiple truths at once, and allow that complexity to coexist, even paradox to coexist, even if it's uncomfortable. And from there, I can truly be compassionate because I'm not favoring a perspective in order to make myself or the other person feel better.
Yeah. I love that. And there's something, I mean, I can't help putting the developmental lens on top of this
Do
journey
it.
that you're describing, because if we think of how people shift through the different developmental stages, there's this shift from placing our attention on the outside, and if we're not happy, blaming the outside world. And then as growth starts to happen, we start to own our own responsibility in co-creating the negative outcomes in our lives more. So I love it when you say first it was the blame, and then what's my contribution here. But then when you turn your attention inwards, the first thing is you blame yourself, then you become very harsh. So then there's another layer of that growth journey where can you be honest and kind with yourself? And that in and of itself is a process of inner growth that can have a transcendent component to it, but also it can have a very practical self-reflection component to it. And also you said something else that intrigued me, this ability to see the gap between your intentions and your actions. And that in itself as well is a developmental capacity that comes with vertical growth, to even be able to notice that how you're showing up is not aligned with the values that are important to you. I don't know, you value kindness and you've just said a harsh word to someone in your life or in your team, and you're like, oh, that there's a gap there. What creates that gap? And the intention I'm holding always with these conversations is, can we learn from the lived, hard won wisdom of people who actually do the work of adult development in their own lives? And in your case, you're also a facilitator of that for groups or organizations where you're helping them see the system now, but you've done that using yourself as a case study first. And I'm so curious, what helped you, what enabled you to go from theory to practice, to be a practitioner of development in your own life?
Yeah,
That
it's a
way.
great question. Yeah, and I think it wouldn't have been possible had I not been trained in a model of facilitation, but also a model of practice that is centers adult learning principles and is about developing effective partnerships with people. And partnership is a very specific definition from the model that I use, and having a mentor to do that. So having a model in my life that was reflective, who walked the talk, who, did the things that he was help training us to do. So there was this meta experience
Yeah.
occurring. And then we would reflect on it as well. So it's like meta. And that blew my mind because I've never experienced learning like that. When you're training to be a scientist, everyone thinks, oh, you're reflective. No, you're not. You're trying to get your results so that you can publish it, get your funding. There's no space for this reflective work, especially when you're doing medical type of research. So this was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this. I found this. I didn't know this is exactly what I needed, but it felt so good and so like right for me.
Yeah.
So I was blessed to have this kind of experience and that mentorship for years. That still continues.
Can you
And
tell us what the model is that you're using?
so there's the theory around how you facilitate groups. And then there's this model called the family partnership model, or the working and partnership model, that comes out of the Center for Parent and Child Support at King's College in the UK. So it's a model of acknowledging the complementary expertise that people bring. So it's based on working with families. So families who've had children, who has children with disabilities or mental health or whatever, and understanding that everyone has their complexity. Everyone exists in their own socio-ecological system. And in order to understand somebody's issue, you have to explore and be very curious about what's going on in their life and what's influencing positively and negatively. And getting clear about, well, is it my perception of negativity or is it theirs that I'm using? So understanding our constructs. So it's a social constructivism approach as well. So there's multiple theories and layers, but essentially it's, I come in with a level of expertise based on my training and experience and practice wisdom, but this parent or whoever it is I'm working with, so do they. They come in with knowledge about their family, their context, but there's things that they know that they don't know they know until I get curious and start to ask them and
Yep.
inquire, and using a reflective approach to help them think about, help them understand or become more aware of their perceptions, but also what drives behaviors, especially around parenting.
Yeah.
And so in modeling this, it's mirroring a secure attached parent-child relationship, but not you as the adult parent and them as the child. But basically, you're trying to model a way of being that will support them to facilitate that same approach between themselves and their child and themselves and their other members of their
Yeah.
family. And again, it draws on adult learning principles, even though it's adapted to working family working with their children. And I found it totally like, it was like, oh my goodness, this was a light bulb moment in my life. And I was like, I need to be doing this with my kids and my family and with everyone, not me. And how to do it in a way that doesn't reproduce what my mentor is showing me that is genuine to me. And
Yeah.
that's
Make
one
it
of the
your own.
yeah, own it, which again takes time because if you've never done this sort of thing before and facilitating groups, you're leaning on the modeling that you've received, but then you have to, and then once you get confident enough, then you find your own way. But you do have to follow a process and a structure because you're trying to maintain the integrity of this model and this approach and the fidelity. And then with as you build confidence, you just find your own way while still working within that structure. and how to build containment within a relationship, how to develop agreements and negotiate how we're going to work together versus I'm the expert here and I'm going to do it my way. So it really is, how do we really complement each other, but work towards a purpose and help you achieve your goals?
Yeah.
So that's, a very kind of meandering explanation of this
That's great.
incredible model.
So what I'm hearing from that is that in this approach, you're needing to foster your own self-awareness and development as the facilitator. So then you can come into these, in this case, family systems to be an enabler of self-awareness and wisdom within that system. But you have to walk the talk all the time and all the way through. You're both intervening, but you're part of the intervention as well. Is that
Exactly.
right?
Ah, you got it. Oh my goodness. You said that more succinctly than me. I mean, yeah, that's really amazing summary.
Oh,
And it really strongly emphasizes reflection, and it's a model of reflective practice. So, in facilitating reflective practice and experiencing it, I'm learning more about myself. And most importantly, it's one thing to think I'm skilled, I'm compassionate, I'm empathetic, I'm being genuine, but it's quite another for the other person to experience that in you. So, unless you are able to reflect and find out the effect of your effect on others, it's just perception. So that's why there's so many people walking around the world thinking they're morally upright and they're good people. And I don't want to get in the way of that, but they also need to confirm the things that they're doing that is showing their goodness or
yep.
beneficial impact on other people. Otherwise, it's just perception, and also finding out what they might be doing that is not beneficial to people, that is actually having the opposite impact than their intent, Yeah.
Yeah. I would love it if we could. So this opens up so many kind of both thoughts and questions for me, because this walking the talk is a bit of an obsession of mine when it comes to facilitation coaching, but also life. Constant work that is required of us to be able to notice when we are not walking the talk. And I see it in so many professional contexts where we come together, we talk about better facilitation, for example, but in the way we talk or engage with each other, we are not actually showing up as conscious, safe space holders for each other. So we could be talking about a thing while not practicing it at all.
Yeah.
And it sounds to me like the approach you've taken to the work that you're doing forces you, whatever you do, you have to keep on walking the talk. And if you're not walking the talk, it doesn't work anymore. I'd love to bring this to life in an example. If there's any kind of context that comes to mind where what does not walking the talk, let's say when you're facilitating, a lot of the people who will be listening to us, they're probably facilitating in some sort of organizational
Yeah.
context, but I think it can be extrapolated, be it in a family or in a classroom with teachers or in a school or
Yeah.
an organization, that the human dynamics will be similar. But what does not walking the talk look like? And what does walking the talk look like? What would be
Yeah.
an example of that?
I guess it depends on the purpose of what we're trying to achieve. Like a lot of the things that I would facilitate in my work or job is this family partnership model. So it's not a teaching model. It's not didactic. I'm not trying to impart all this stuff from the content. The content comes from the people. So not walking the talk is where I claim there's no right or wrong answer. All perspectives are welcome. And then a perspective comes in and I'm like, yeah, I don't think that's what we're talking about here.
Uh-huh.
So that's going to have an effect on the person who shared that, because they're under this impression that there's no right or wrong. We've come to an agreement. We negotiate with each other how we're going to be and how we're not going to be. And here I am putting down the thing because something about what they said made me uncomfortable in the moment. And that's the way I responded versus, wow, that's an interesting perspective. What other perspectives do others have around this topic? That would have been a different way to facilitate in the moment, where I'm not putting that person down and I'm not saying anything. There's no judgment. It's just, okay, that's interesting. Let's hear what others think as well.
Yep. Yeah, I love that. And the parallel organization example that comes to mind is when we bring teams together to do work around trust. I have a bit of an allergy to this topic because I don't think we don't build trust in a workshop. But
Yeah.
there'll be this expectation that there's not enough trust in this team, and let's come together and have those honest, difficult conversations,
Oof.
what's really happening here. And then the moment somebody says something controversial, they are being either subtly or very directly shut down, and
Yeah.
nobody says anything. And then the team is going through the motions of having an offsite day
Yeah. And
that
it's just
results in
awkward.
nothing. It's
Yeah.
social game we play that ends up
Yeah.
having actually perhaps even a detrimental effect on trust, because
Yeah.
we see the hypocrisy of the process at play.
Yeah. And I'm supposed to be an authority in the room, not the authority, but an authority that has a very clear role and responsibility, as does everyone else. And I'm undermining my position. And there's a flip side. So there's the participant who says this thing that is flat out factually wrong, but they're presenting it with such conviction. And say they're in a group of colleagues, the people that they work with every day, or at least they have interaction with, and they tend to be the dominant voice. So it shuts everyone else down.
Yep.
So, me as a facilitator would not be walking my talk if I just let that go
Yep.
and just said, okay, that's an interesting thought. Any other perspectives? When it's actually factually wrong. And by me not saying anything, it's almost like an endorsement. So I'm aware of my authoritativeness in the space as well. And how do I use it to also go, okay, so that's one way of looking at it. And, or, yeah, I'd actually have to disagree with that because of what we know about evidence, or some other way,
Yep.
or finding a way to work it, but challenge it in some way. But because if I don't do it, I'm actually not walking my talk. And that's me not being quite influential or facilitative and purposeful as a facilitator.
Yep. So let me throw another kind of pebble in the pond here. If you are doing this work in an organizational context, and the person who makes the shutting down comment or whatever it is the leader of the team, who might be your biggest stakeholder, and on them depends the continuation of your work with that team or that organization, but your stated purpose is to really facilitate a safe space where the team can open up. It takes a lot of guts and a lot of moral backbone. And this is perhaps where hacking narcissism and the bridge to the core of what you're writing about comes in, to be able to call that out and take the risk of you might never be called back again. And that leader who just paid you to facilitate what they're hoping is going to be a very constructive conversation with their team, but a conversation that will not make them uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And you are now making them deeply uncomfortable.
Yeah. So how do we deal with that?
How do you deal with that? What's the moral conundrum there for you?
Yeah, the moral conundrum is that I have this domineering person who's probably the reason why they need to have this workshop.
In the first place, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm at risk of being part of a theater performing the good work that they're investing in to look good in front of everyone.
Yes.
But everyone else is not an idiot, and they're going to see that this was just another thing that betrays their trust or reinforces why they're not valued, and reason to not trust the organization and then me. So I don't want to participate in this person's dysfunctional ways. I would have to say something, and again, not putting them on the spot, not shutting them down, but I would also need to have a chat with them during a break and ask them how they're feeling about this, how's it all going, and then share an observation. I noticed when you said this, there was a lot of silence in the room. I'm wondering about the effect of that on everyone else. What are your thoughts?
Yeah.
So, and knowing there's the other stuff that you do before the workshop, because if you've had conversations with that leader or whoever booked it in, you'd be wondering, how's this coming about? What's actually the real backstory behind this? What's going on in that culture? If it's the leader booking, I would have a conversation about my facilitation style and what to expect. And if they're used to saying what they want in sharing past experience of how that doesn't always work. And if they want something of value that will make them be seen as the helpful leader, these are the approaches that I recommend. And then in the workshop, my approach is that there's always a development of an agreement of how we're going to, like, what is everyone's goals and how are we going to work together, and make some things quite explicit, acknowledging leaders in the room might feel really vulnerable. And then people in the room who are not used to saying things, they might also feel that. So I'm making things quite explicit throughout a process. So it makes it harder for that person to just come in and say something. Or if they do say something, everyone's been already put on alert. And so it makes it easier to have that chat and they'll be like, oh, I did that thing, versus shaming them or saying something in the moment that will make them feel small.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, you can't control everything, but if you have enough safeguards in place, it makes it easier to deal with it.
Yep, I agree. And that is very much what my own experience has been and continues to be with my
Yeah.
clients. But I've noticed over the years, it's been a process of being ever more honest with me. And in the process of being ever more honest with me, gaining more courage to be ever more honest with them.
Yeah.
And normalizing that level of discomfort. That, are you wanting to do real work, or
Mm.
are you wanting to be seen as doing work?
Yeah.
And having the courage to say, oh, if you're just wanting to be seen as doing work, maybe I'm not the right person to be
Exactly.
spearheading
Yeah.
or facilitating that. But if we really want to be doing work, let's get ready for how that is going to be deeply uncomfortable for the person
Yeah.
initiating a learning project or sponsoring a learning project. And if it's their team, yes, for the leader of that team to
Yeah.
really accept and acknowledge. If you feel like you've got a problem, you're almost certainly a huge part of the problem, and owning that as a prerequisite
Yeah.
will enable real good building work to happen, versus it's them. It's like in a family when
Yeah.
possibly parents say, oh, you need to work with the kids have a problem,
Yeah.
versus this is a system that we're in, and
Yeah.
very likely if the kids have a problem, the parents are part of co-creating or maintaining
Yeah.
whatever the problem may be.
Yeah. And some leaders they take more work. And then there's my part as well. I might think I'm performing all the skills, saying all the right things, but there's something about me that might not have been able to put them at ease enough where they can just relax into the space a bit more. There's something I need to be
How do
mindful of
I
and
show
keep
up?
working on. Yeah. Yeah. And some people need a little bit more support than what I normally do. And so I have to put myself out a bit more, which is a little more uncomfortable for me, but it's again for a bigger purpose. So there's ways that I'm going to be stretched as a facilitator about what I need to do, which opposes how I normally do things. And it's not about being fake. It's just, I'm not normally as supportive, but in order to get this person on board a little more and make it easier for me and everyone else, I do need to not stroke their ego, but give them a little more support and encouragement than I would normally do with people.
Yep. I feel like asking you, and this might seem like a very silly question because I know there's not a one simple answer to it, but how do you hack your own narcissism? And we could be, to not make this conversation too big, we could be zooming in. How do you hack your own narcissism as a facilitator of learning in any kind of shape or form? And perhaps how do you hack your own narcissism as a leader? What is there that you've learned from those perspectives, those two perspectives? Maybe let's start with as a learning facilitator, because it seems like this is naturally where our conversation is
Yeah.
heading. And I'd love to offer an example or a bit of an experience that I've had recently where I've been made to reflect on that in a workshop. I ran this strategy session for a learning and development team in a very large organization. So these were the people who were holding the learning for the rest of the organization, and particularly for the leaders in the organization. They were facilitators, they were program designers, they were the people who had to think about how do you create meaningful learning experiences for everyone else. But then that session ended up being about them as humans, them as a team, them as professionals who have to hold safe spaces for others, and what this means for their egos. And there was this meta perspective of me being a facilitator, facilitating something for other facilitators, which always is a tricky business because these are not people who are on the receiving end of a workshop. They are people who create, they have opinions about how facilitation has to be done. So at some point during those 3 days, one of them asked me, she said, do you worry about what people think about you? because we were having a conversation
Mm.
about you have to be willing to take some risks as a facilitator. You have sometimes to make the choice. Do I want to be liked
Mm.
by making this a very comfortable, easy, nice experience for people that will yield very positive feedback at the end, as in, oh, this was great, I felt good? Or am I willing to take some risks to create some discomfort in the room? But still, how do I do that in a way that honors,
Mm.
respects people, really shows them that this is something I'm doing in service of you? It's not something I'm doing to
Mm.
create fear or shame, or there's a difference between developmental discomfort and fear and shame. And
Yeah.
her question was so beautiful in the, when you're taking those risks, there's always a risk that people just not like you. You're just inviting them to sit in confusion, and that will not make you popular as a
Mm.
facilitator. It's just easier to get over the confusing moment and do something easy and nice. And
Yeah.
she made me reflect on what is it that truly matters for me when I'm facilitating. And it occurred to me that actually I've come to this space of my only purpose is to create a valuable learning experience that stretches those people in a way that is useful to them. And if part of the price to pay for that is that at some point during the experience, they're going to say, we don't like you right now, that's fine. And how different the energy is when I don't lead with that and I lead with, I'm just worried about the feedback, or what are people going to think
Yeah.
about me? And how paradoxically, when I do stay anchored in that intention, I really want to be in service of the learning of this group.
Yeah.
Most of the time, people are actually happy with me too
Yeah.
at the end,
Mm.
without me necessarily making that a goal in and of itself. But that
Yeah.
is a long-winded way to say there's something about the ego and the hacking
Mm.
my own narcissism that I feel is meaningful in that choice. So I'm,
Yes.
yeah. So tell me what your take is on that. How do
um,
you hack your narcissism as a
yeah.
facilitator?
Well, it's probably a good idea to describe what hacking narcissism is in the first place,
Yes.
because when people hear the word narcissism, they think the clinical pathology and cluster B and all this stuff. And that's not what I'm referring to. I'm referring to the interpersonal dynamic. So it's not about the individual and being a narcissist. Nope. So let's get that out of the way. It's how we have a tendency to want to dominate. That's this human nature. We want to dominate, we want to be in control. But we don't like to be dominated, and we don't like having other people in control of us. So it's really about, what is it that I'm doing, or what do I need to do to be in control of my actions, but not try to control another person's experience or their perceptions, and try to dominate and overpower them with my way, because I know I'm a strong personality and I can do that. And it's not good for anybody, because then they don't get their say. They doubt their intuition. And that's not the effect I want to have on anyone.
Yeah.
So I have to be clear about what I want others to experience around me. And then I have to be clear as well about my character traits and the things that work well and the things that can get in the way, and modify myself. And it's easier when you're in a reflective practice process frequently. You become more and more aware of yourself and how you work with power, whereas others don't. And again, they assume their intentions will lead to the impact, the desired impact, and that's often not the case.
Yeah.
Hacking narcissism means I'm prepared to examine myself and the impact of my actions, learn about them, learn about others' experience, not make someone else's experience more important than, or their perspective more important than mine, but understand, how is somebody perceiving me? How much of it is truth? How much is it of their own woundedness or bias? And what do I take in order to modify myself, to grow into the kind of person that I envision for myself,
Mm.
that is realistic, that it's not like, and I'm going to save the world. So it does require, I think, maturity. It does require some good modeling around you, and a practice that is based on some rigorous framework that allows you to continue visit yourself from a place of curiosity and inquiry, rather than self-criticism or affirming the things that you're already doing so that you feel better about yourself. Yeah.
So you're making in your work, when you define what, hacking narcissism means, not in the pathological, but in the day-to-day
Hmm.
interactions between human beings, there's an assumption that our default, our baseline is, if we can dominate or impose our will on others, we will have the impulse to do always. Is that right?
Well, I'm not going to say black or white always, but that's a tendency because humans are familiar with hierarchy. We're comfortable and also uncomfortable with hierarchy. So we default into these power imbalances because that helps a lot of us feel more comfortable with ourselves and in control of our world. And the other person is likely trying that as well when there's potential for insecurity. So this happens in a facilitation environment, in a
Right.
learning environment, when they're challenged to learn something new. And I'm asking them to go deeper into their thinking about themselves or their understanding about things to derive meaningful new ideas or insights that they can then apply and create a change in their practice. That's the kind of work that I do. So it's always uncomfortable. So people are always going to find ways to stay in control. And sometimes that means they try to overpower or dominate a narrative. And I might do the same if I'm feeling pushed.
Yeah.
And, so the narcissism aspect is the need for validation, attention, control, power,
Yeah.
importance, significance.
Yeah. So you
And
could satisfy that need through dominating in some subtle or more direct
yeah,
way. Would it be fair to say that you might also try to satisfy that same need through being extremely nice and accommodating?
yeah, yeah. It's whatever whatever strategies that will make you liked and make it easier for you to get through this process that you're doing. Some people use victimhood as a domination tactic, interpersonal victimhood, where no one could have a worse day than me because it's so bad. And so you have to take care of me. You have to pay attention to me. So there's so many different strategies us humans use in order to be in control.
Mm-hmm.
It's being in control, not of ourselves, being in control of the other person as well, and how their perceptions of us. And I don't think that's healthy if
Yeah.
we want to have equitable, mutually beneficial relationships where we trust each other, we respect each other, and we could be with each other in our differences and similarities without any problems.
Yeah.
So it does require a need to refine what I'll call refine our egos so that we can sit with discomfort. We can sit when shame is activated in us and not project and blame and withdraw and run away, that we are able to just bear it and then go through a process where, like, it's just a feeling. It's not what they think of me. It's not that I'm a bad person. It's just a feeling. And I might verbalize it. I might just keep it to myself and then respond in my preferred way,
Yeah.
despite whatever's going on for me internally, which I think we have to do a lot as facilitators.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so fascinating to me. And I remember I had this thought when we first chatted that you, in your work, you came to the same core realization that I came to through my own research, that the ability to tolerate emotional pain and discomfort is core
Mm,
to maturity, or our ability to make mature, wise choices
mm,
versus the I want to be liked,
yeah.
I want to dominate, or I want to
Mm,
control the narrative in some shape or form kinds of
yeah.
choices. The
Yeah.
ability to feel shame in your body and not run away from it through an easy fix.
Yeah.
And in my research, what I found that helped was when people both acknowledged that emotion is a sign of growth rather than a danger to them.
Yeah.
And also when they got curious about what is it that made me feel this way, or what does this emotion in a way try to teach me, that
Mm,
ability to pour curiosity on top of shame or fear or confusion,
mm,
anxiety, whatever it is, that seemed to create that ability to hold it better and then choose our response rather than react. And
yes.
curious if you found this or anything else in your own work that actually helps people increase their tolerance for that emotional discomfort. How do you support people to learn this skill? Or do
Mm.
you even think of it as a skill? Because I do.
Absolutely. So I've developed a framework to understand shame because I believe intolerance to shame is the foundation of all our problems in society, in our relationships, but in society as well. And so I've developed a little framework to define shame in three different ways, or to break it down three different ways, and how it's used as a weapon against ourselves. It's not about others shaming us, it's how we do it. A good job of doing that to ourselves and our interpretation of that intense feeling of shame and how to use it as an ally, a learning tool to create change in our lives. There's three different kind of shames, I call them. And when people feel it, they can identify shame 1, shame 2, or shame 3
Yeah.
based on the context. And therefore, there's the fix or the question that you ask to help move you towards using that feeling constructively. Because I don't believe there is such a thing as a toxic emotion or a negative emotion. They're just states, and we develop really unhelpful narratives about that sensation in our body versus the message that they're trying to help us learn or perceive in the moment so that we can take a positive action that aligns or is more congruent with our intent.
Yeah. So what
So,
are the three shames?
oh, that's a whole other conversation. But so shame 1 is, so basically shame, I see it as it's a moral emotion, it's a social emotion. It helps you gauge whether or not you are being your actions are aligned with your moral principles, whatever they may be. And it goes beyond, oh, I'm just a good person. They just misunderstood me, where you're deflecting responsibility. You're taking responsibility, but it is about your congruence. And you feel shame when there's an incongruence. So I'm studying at school and I said the wrong thing or did the wrong thing, and I didn't know there was a rule about this, that I wasn't supposed to do this thing. And I'm told, I'm shamed, I guess. So
Yeah.
I feel ashamed, even though logically, like, why do I feel this? I didn't know about this rule. I didn't know that I crossed a line and that I wasn't supposed to cross. It's ridiculous. So basically, I violated a rule or a norm based on a framework that I had nothing to do with developing. So it's not a me problem.
And you
It's
may
like,
not even have been aware of. So you made a
exactly.
mistake and you didn't even know there was a rule.
Yeah.
So
So
that's shame
this,
one. You feel like you've
that's shame 1.
fundamentally failed in some way. You're wrong
Yeah.
in some way.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the narrative is I'm wrong, I'm bad,
I'm
versus I misstepped because I didn't actually know that I
bad.
couldn't do it. So it's recognizing, that's the context I'm in. Someone else's rule book, not my rules. And it's okay. I'm not a bad person. Fine.
This is the hack in a way, what you
Yeah.
said now, the recognition of I could not have known this rule was in place.
Yeah.
I made a mistake. It does not mean I'm a bad person. So you're recognizing the narrative that
Yeah.
I'm a bad person and you're challenging that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yes. So they're all, because shame makes us, the foundational narrative of this emotional state is often I'm a bad person, I suck, I don't belong, and fear and insecurity and inadequacy and there's so many.
Yeah.
So it's a way to challenge it, disrupt it, and
Yeah.
change.
And
Change
reframe.
your response to reframe, but also that changes your response to
Yeah.
yourself and the situation. Shame 2 is where moral injury can come from. So you're working in a system, there's a set of rules and protocols, but the pressure of the system or the situation expects you to violate your moral principles in order to please it. But in doing so, you not only harm somebody, but you harm yourself. So you're the dual victim and perpetrator in that scenario. So you're going to feel like you're the most awful person on earth because you hurt someone, but you violated by violating principles in order to please an external authority.
Yes. God, I need to say something about this, Nathalie, because this is such a massive light bulb moment for me. There's a particular stage of development that has been showing up more and more post COVID, which we call redefining. It's like a post conventional later stage, a very questioning kind of stage of development where people really ask those kinds of heavy duty moral questions. Who am I? How do I want to show up? And post COVID, we're seeing a jump from maybe 15% in organizations, people scoring at this stage when we measure them with psychometrics, to 40%, particularly in leadership positions. So a lot of people are asking themselves these kinds of difficult moral questions. But there's also this phenomenon of redefiners in hiding, where a huge number of those redefiner thinkers, they show up as less a simpler, more black and white version of themselves. They're camouflaging themselves. They feel like they need to show up as the performer or the expert, even though on a deeper level they go, what am I doing this for? What's the purpose here?
Yeah.
So that actually, I've seen so much suffering in so many of the clients that I work with in organizations from that perceived need to hide who you are, what you care about, the deep questions that you really want to ask, but you don't dare ask because you feel like nobody around you is interested in that. Everybody's looking at
Mhm.
PNL.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are genuinely tormented by this. And like now you put this in your shame too box, which makes so much sense. That actually these people do feel shame for
Mm.
not showing up as who they, and they think there's something profoundly wrong with them.
Yeah.
I
That's
don't
a
fit in
hallmark.
here. What's going on with me? I'm profoundly flawed.
Yeah. So that's a hallmark of well, moral injury. And moral injury and moral distress, I think they need to be kept apart because moral injury, I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But regardless, a moral violation occurred and it's a self-betrayal. And when there's self-betrayal, there's a loss of trust and
Wow.
there's a loss of empathy and it's trust in self, but also trust in the world around you. So they're operationalizing a trauma lens of themselves in the world versus how they perceive themselves before that betrayal. And I do believe it's has a traumatic effect
Yeah.
because of the loss of trust and the kind of lack of clarity about their own identity. They don't know how to be in different places because they lack that trust and they haven't reconstructed post that event
Yeah.
or those events. So yeah, it is based in shame that I don't deserve to be here. There's something profoundly wrong with me. So instead of shame is your enemy, shame is now your ally. It's okay. I basically violated my own principles. This is the result of just me crossing my own line, and never mind what happened out there. But I'm also recognizing the role of external authority and that I wanted to please that over pleasing myself.
So you feel like you're torn between honoring you
Mm.
and honoring the external pressures of
Yeah.
context that you're in. That
Yes.
is
Like
still, we're still in shame too
we're
scenario.
still ashamed too. And it's all like, okay, so that's exactly what happened. So rather than me beating myself up over it, which I feel remorse, which is a good thing because it means I'm ready to resolve this within myself through whatever healing process, but also to make a change that I never do this again.
But how do you make that change? Because what a lot of people say that I work with when they recognize that conflict is, I feel I'm trapped. I'm
Mm.
trapped in this well paying job that I'm afraid to leave because I've got all of these other commitments in my life that I need to honor. I feel I'm trapped. I have to go there and continue doing this because
Mm.
my family depends on me and their well
Yeah.
being and survival depend on me. So the moral choice becomes quite often also a financial conundrum.
Yeah.
And there's also, I'm noticing a feeling of shame and guilt at even considering prioritizing self.
Yeah.
People feel afraid and guilty. If I quit this toxic job, I'm actually being extremely selfish. I'm going to let my family down. My
Yeah.
kids are going to be at risk. And so I feel an added layer of shame there
Yeah.
in even considering making a choice that puts you, honoring you on the first place. Do you
Yeah.
see that playing out in
Absolutely. But usually this kind of discovery of this moral distress or this moral wound is the beginning of a process
a
of
process?
change.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
There's no
once you
one
see it, you
right.
can. Yeah, it's not about hitting eject on your current life and bringing more chaos. It's
Yeah.
recognizing I'm playing a part that is actually not healthy for me. Lots of dependence around me, or lots of dependency, and my dependency on a toxic system. So either I adjust myself and assimilate to the system, and then I don't feel things anymore, which is going to end up hurting me in the long term, short term and long term. Or I start making small changes in my life to start to bring more focus into my needs
Yeah.
instead of making them secondary and
It's not a
sacrificing.
clean cut. I
No,
figured out the conflict. Now I'm going
no.
to black or white kind of decision.
Yeah,
Just recognizing it and then going, where are the tweaks where you can bring more
yeah,
congruence?
yeah,
Yeah, it'll start a process.
yeah.
Oh,
And
yeah.
the beginning is they have to actually make this feeling known to the loved ones in their life. So,
Yeah.
like, I'm noticing this is the stuff that I'm going through right now. This is my dilemma, and need to find a different way.
Yeah.
And doesn't mean today, it just means I want to start this process. Yeah, but the shame aspect is just being aware that this is the foundation of these like faulty thoughts. Then I can do something about it and make it like a neutral narrative where I'm looking at my life with impartiality and like, oh, I just crossed this line. This is what happened. Doesn't mean I'm a horrible person. I recognize how I was influenced to go down this path, and I don't need to repeat it now
Yeah.
that I have this knowledge, because repeating it is going to cause more and more harm to myself.
Mhm.
So I can do something about it, but I might need to develop some skill to be able to push back where I haven't before.
Yes. Okay.
So I don't repeat it. So it's an invitation to start to explore skill development and communication, etc.
Yeah.
But it's a way to depersonalize it.
Yeah. Beautiful. Okay. So what does shame three look?
Yeah, let's get to shame three. So
Yeah.
shame three is when maybe this falls in the spectrum of moral development or adult development, where you're aware of your principles. You're quite clear of what you need to do, but you've discovered you're in a situation where others are dominating you. So it could be a parent adult child relationship where the parent is always getting their way, and the parent goes into this victim mode, and then you feel guilty, and then you appease them, and then you hate yourself after, and you've decided, I don't want to go through this anymore. I'm a bloody adult. I'm 50 years old. I'm not going to keep living my life like this. I have to make a change because it's making me miserable and I can never grow up. But I'm very clear about the boundary I need to make because, you know, so shame three is shame three comes about when I have implemented the boundary. And I've done some work where I've done it in such a compassionate way, gentle or whatever, or it doesn't matter. It could be abrupt. However, I did it, I did it. And I feel so good about myself because I'm finally living into my principles. I'm being congruent with them instead of the opposite that I've been doing all along. But shortly after this great feeling, I start to feel guilty and shame because I've disrupted the system.
Yeah.
And now I'm bad, even though I've done the right thing by me and I'm not harming anyone in the process. Just the way they've required me, I'm cutting that supply short a little bit. And they can't feed off me the way they did before because it drains me. And they need to find another supplier, and it's not me. So
Yeah.
this is my first step or second step or a step towards that. I'm going to feel shame because I disrupted the system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So shame three comes after you've stepped out of shame two. So better I got this
Yeah.
right. Once you do your job around addressing shame two, recognizing how you're being incongruent and all of that,
Yeah.
and you're setting some boundaries in place, which might mean maybe stepping out of some relationships,
Mm.
distancing yourself from certain people in your life, all of
Yeah.
that, you start to feel yet another layer of shame
Yeah.
having rocked the boat.
Yeah.
And for some people, having maybe been upset or suffered as a result of you rocking the boat.
Yeah.
Right?
Suffer. Yes. Yeah. They're in pain. You cause pain, even though you were doing something to cause less pain for yourself. And I'm saying you didn't cause harm. It's just the feedback you're getting is you've hurt me, or how dare you, the kind of manipulative guilt trips, or the silent treatment, or nothing is said, but you feel it. You feel it. And so what I suggest to people is that it's not your shame. It's actually not your shame. It's coming from the system. So it could be the parent, the friend, the boss, whoever it is, because they've been the dominant force. You're trying to create a balance or equality by implementing this change, this behavioral change or this response. And what's coming to you is their emotion that has been driving you all along. It was never yours. And so the way I get people to recognize that it's not their emotion is then they're feeling guilty or whatever. I go, okay, I want you to close your eyes and tell every cell in your body that if you're holding on to any emotion like shame or guilt for someone else, then they have to let it go when you breathe. So I get them to breathe, and instantly they feel like, oh, a little bit of relief, like, oh. So they know it wasn't theirs because it's a kind of, when you have an emotional connection with someone, that energy flows between us. And there's this sort of contagion. So when you are in a relationship where you're the kind of passive, non-dominant person, everything that's coming to you, their thoughts, their feelings, they're flowing to you, but you're not flowing to them because you're not the dominant. They're feeding you and drawing energy and
Yeah. And yet when
attention from.
you refuse to give that energy away, the shame you're feeling or the upset you're feeling, this what you're saying is actually the other person's upset
Yeah.
that you're
Yeah.
internalizing,
Yeah. You're
taking
feeling
on
as yours because you've been serving them. You've been fulfilling a role and almost protecting them. So there's this kind of primal, and again, I can't explain the mechanism, but I can only explain the consistent effect of intending to breathe that out of you and how people feel so much clearer after. And so that is part of the process to deal with that shame three. So
Yep.
it's like recognize what's yours and what's not theirs, because you've merged in a psychic space and you're trying to unmerge and reclaim your space. So part of it is you have to recognize what is your thoughts and feelings and what are theirs. And the more you're getting clear about that, the less they're going to be able to interfere with your space
So
as
let me
you're.
ask you this then. I've got a perfect case study for you for shame three. A conversation I had with someone recently about being a good person and our definition of being a good person and how hard it is to set boundaries when you feel like people are breaking your boundaries. So exactly the scenario you described earlier. And this person said to me, how can I consider myself a good person when I see how my boundaries, my no, my pushback has generated so much suffering in the other person? How can I continue to see myself and feel like I am still a good person if I've willingly caused suffering to the other person? So, how do you reconcile that? And I'll share with you what my take on it was. I'd love
Yeah.
through the lens of shame three to hear what your take on it was. Because when she asked me that, I was like, yeah, I can completely, having gone through my own moments in life where I had to, for example, get out of an unhappy relationship and felt so shamed and guilty for the other person's suffering. The way I reconciled it was in a way separating what you said, like is it mine or theirs, but also is me causing discomfort to this other person, can that be a good growth inducing thing for them? Because our relationship was not healthy, those boundaries were definitely needed. They were benefiting from me continuing to be part of that toxic dynamic, but they were not actually growing from it either. So they needed that clean break as much as I did, but they're very unhappy because they didn't choose the break.
Yeah.
So it almost, I thought, oh, am I just kidding myself here? Can I still be a good person having caused someone else discomfort while trusting that is actually a growth inducing thing for both me and them, even though they don't like it and they're not happy?
Yeah.
And if I had kept them in comfort, continued our old dynamic, they would not have learned anything. They would have been comfortable because they were getting a lot of energy from me in that dynamic. But actually, I was doing them a disservice by continuing to play in an unhealthy dynamic.
Yeah. So that's the kind of compassionate and benevolent narrative for that other person, so that they could see that their action is actually going to have a benefit, even though it's coming with the perceived pain. So yeah, that's a great explanation. My approach is I would go into tell me more about this good person thing. Tell me more about what you mean. What does that look like? Because, and then hear their perspectives, explore it a bit more, because what they're doing is focusing their concept of good person on how others experience them, less about themselves. So it's helping them define good person. So if I were a friend and I was telling you this story, would you think I'm a bad person? You probably wouldn't,
No.
because you're saying you're looking after yourself. So how are you any different? Are you any more special? Stop being such a narcissist. Stop making yourself above everyone, that you have to be a saint, like make light of it as well. So I would approach that and help them and challenge their construct about good person versus good enough person, and help them add some definition to it that helps them understand that. And then part of it is also, okay, how do you know they're suffering? What is it? What's the feedback you're getting? How do you know, is that all that's going on in their life? How do you know they didn't get off the phone after this manipulative conversation and then went, hi, how you doing, to their friend and acting all normal? Are they really suffering then?
Yeah.
So you're only going to hear what they want you to hear to get you to go back against yourself and placate them again, which is not going to be a good place for you. So I approach it from different ways, but whatever tactics work, but really getting them to think about this good person. And why does it matter if you're a good person? Who cares? Who's this for anyway? So like finding ways to challenge that a little bit, depending on the relationship I have, because some of these constructs could be a barrier to actually living what is according to our principles. And sometimes those principles need calibration. instead of a black and white view, to understand how they apply in different contexts that
Mhm.
still let them live into their perception of I'm a good person here.
Yep. So that also connects so beautifully with the adult developmental continuum and journey, where growth is switching from thinking in black or white, fixed identities, to
Yeah.
making room for more gray and for expanding what your definition of yourself is and looks
Yeah.
like. And also owning more of that, maybe as we might call it, that shadow side, that
Mm.
part of us that normally we don't want to look at or we don't want to integrate as being part of us. There's a side of me that sets very firm boundaries, and that might be not nice or not pleasant to certain
Yeah.
people who are on the receiving end of those boundaries. And yet,
Yeah.
there's room enough for me in my definition of me as a good person to make room for the boundary setting me alongside the open, curious,
Mm.
accommodating me.
Yep. Yeah.
Ooh, I feel so enriched by this conversation. I
Me
feel like
too.
it's such a big, like a big part of piece of the puzzle has fallen into place for me. And
Oh, great.
yeah, thank you. I'm so grateful. And I'm also wondering how could people, maybe potentially even in your description of the three shames, three types of shame, there's an invitation to experiment maybe in different
Yeah.
contexts. If you were to invite people to experiment with something around the three types of shame, what would you invite them to do?
Well, there's a foundation before I go into the three shames. And the foundation is, and I'm sure you know this well, and everyone knows this well, is Cartman's dreaded drama triangle. So it's a relational model that understands that we play these different roles of the victim, persecutor, and rescuer. And there's additions to this model that are like the antidote to these three roles. But what I suggest to people is then when we feel shame, we tend to go into the victim, even when we're the perpetrator in the situation. It makes it hard for us to admit that I could have been the cause of wrongdoing. So, my practical way of helping people understand the shame thing is, well, we are all these roles all at once. We're not this, that, or the other, because there's so many different ways to perceive the situation. The way I perceive it will be different to how you perceive it, Alice, how a third person perceives it. And they might see me as the perpetrator and you as the victim, or someone else might see me as the victim. So there's no accuracy here. So you might as well acknowledge that I'm all the roles at once. So, how am I the victim here? How am I the perpetrator here? How might I be trying to rescue the situation here? And how do I transcend these roles, which gets me nowhere because I'm disempowered and sitting in shame regardless of these roles, and understand that there's other ways that I was trying to do something here that fell short. So I was trying to use my agency to create a specific outcome that I didn't get to. So what was the outcome that I wanted, and what would I have needed to do differently in order to get there? And so I'm starting to activate more of my creative facilitator. And how might I have facilitated that? So instead of the rescuer, I'm the facilitator. Instead of the victim, I'm the one who has agency, has my internal locus of control, and that I'm in command of what I can do, regardless of the context or despite the context. And then the perpetrator or the persecutor is the challenger. What was the challenge in the situation that was the test? That I might have failed here, but I can learn from it and then do better next time. So that's how I help people use it. So the shame 1, 2, and 3 is a way of working with that. But first, I have to acknowledge that I'm not perfect. I mess up, and I could have easily been the wrongdoer as well as the victim. And my effort to like feel neither is to go into the savior mode where I'm like, I just tried to save the day. So these are all narratives, and all of them are true. But there are other narratives that are also true. And how do I work them in? So the shame antidote are those ways of working it in.
Yeah. Well, if you've listened to this point, there's a pretty awesome experiment invitation in there
Yeah.
around what is the patterning in our relational dynamics, and how do we challenge our own narratives, and maybe use shame as a hint that some growth opportunity is afoot rather than there's something deeply wrong with us. I have one last question for you, Natalie. I mean, I have 1,000 other questions, but one last question for this conversation. I know you care very deeply about about this work of helping people see these dynamics and maybe coming back to where we started, see how they become the cancerous cells, how we become entangled in these toxic dynamics at work or at home. What is your hope for this work that you are doing? What would you love to see shifting or happening differently in these workplaces or in these homes?
Well, I think a major problem is what I said just before. We default into victimhood, into the victim role whenever we feel shame, whether or not we're the perpetrator of the situation. So when we go into victim mode, this is where we start to enlist these narcissistic behaviors in order to regain a sense of control and restore our self-image that we're a good person. But it's not necessarily helpful because of the drama that it causes with other people. My hope is through sharing all this stuff and getting people to start to reflect on their own behavior from a curiosity perspective and not a critical, to self-critique and blame and shame, that hopefully starts to open up people to what you said, the grays, the nuances, and the complexity of behavior in any context, but also to become aware of how the external environment, so our workplaces, our relationships, those also have an influence on our behavior and our responses to situations. So it's getting people to be clear about where they have control and where they don't, and what is the influence around them, and how might they align their actions to match the outcome they want, or towards the outcome they want, given the context they're in. So rather than I'm a victim because of the big bad system or the big bad person, how am I co-creating this reality for myself? How am I contributing to the situation I find myself in? And if I'm that powerful to contribute to it, then I'm that powerful to do something different and find an exit from it or transform it into something better. So it is helping, hopefully, people see their part that they play. And I'm not talking about abuse, I'm just talking about our day-to-day kind of situations,
Yeah.
and how they can play a part, but also where they have power to do something different.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Is there anything else I haven't asked you? Anything else that you would have loved to share here that maybe it hasn't occurred to me or we didn't get to it, but
I think we covered a lot of territory. I feel pretty complete.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
Thank you.
I'm super grateful for just your wisdom and your courage to challenge yourself over and over again and to acknowledge how important doing the work ourselves of being honest, facing our own shame, or going to all of those uncomfortable places is the thing that will enable us to hold spaces for others to do that. And I'm leaving with this thought that I'd really love to reflect more on, that shame. I think you said something along the lines of shame is the big thing, driver, conundrum. I can't remember exactly. I'll have to go back to the recording to remember what the word was that you said, that it is at the root of so many of our behaviors. And it seems to me that collectively, if we got better, as you said, at dealing with our shame, so much of the societal, even global collective dysfunction that we're seeing, we might find healthier ways out of it. Because
Yes.
so much abusive behavior online and in society is driven by shame and our inability to sit with this emotion, understand it, work with it.
Yes. The intolerance to shame.
Tolerance to shame.
Intolerance. Yeah.
So here's to more tolerance to shame and a lot of
Yeah.
gratitude for you, Nathalie.
Thank you. Gratitude to you, Alice, for facilitating this conversation and going wherever it needed to go.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
As with many of the developmental episodes, I leave this conversation with so much gratitude for the wisdom I've received, for the connections I've made, and for the growth I am able to get from having access to these wonderful minds like Nathalie's. I hope you are left with some reflective questions of your own some of the things that have sparked most interesting connections for me in this particular conversation has been Nathalie's concept of the three shames. I had never considered these flavors of shame before. And after we stopped the recording, we started to chat about envy as another extraordinarily powerful and difficult emotion, and some of the connections between envy and shame. So expect a follow up to this episode in some other form, perhaps an article we are considering writing together. But in the meantime, you can find a lot of really wonderful, thought provoking content on Nathalie's Substack, Hacking Narcissism. I encourage you to subscribe and keep on learning from her brilliant mind. Thank you for listening. Until next time, I hope you stay curious, present, and kind to yourselves and others.